Why do good people suffer? It's perhaps humanity's oldest question, and no biblical story confronts this mystery more directly than the book of Job. From his unimaginable prosperity to devastating loss, from his friend's misguided advice to his legendary confrontation with God himself, Job's journey takes us to the very edge of human endurance and divine revelation. Today we'll walk through every chapter of this ancient masterpiece and discover why it remains one of the most profound explorations of suffering, faith, and divine justice ever written. But before we dive in, if you're new to this channel, consider hitting that like and subscribe button. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is. We're building a global community here. So without further ado, let's begin, shall we? Picture a man sitting alone on a heap of ashes at the edge of town, his skin once smooth, now covered in painful sores from head to toe. With a broken piece of pottery, he gently scrapes his wounds, seeking a moment's relief from the constant pain. This is Job, a man who had everything, and then lost it all in a single day. The ash heap tells its own story. It's where the outcasts gather, where the unwanted things of society are tossed away and forgotten. And here sits a man who once walked among kings, now reduced to nothing but suffering and questions. Why do good people suffer? It's an ancient question that haunts us still. When bad things happen to those who seem least to deserve it, we're faced with a mystery that shakes the very foundations of faith. How can we make sense of a world where virtue offers no shield against disaster? Job's story speaks to anyone who has ever looked up at the sky and asked, "Why me?" It's a tale about loss, friendship, faith, and what happens when a human being dares to question the divine. It asks us to think about the very nature of good and evil, of divine justice, and the limits of human understanding. The power of Job's story lies in its refusal to give easy answers. Here, in the meeting place between human suffering and divine mystery, we find not a simple moral lesson, but a profound invitation to wonder. Job doesn't just offer comfort to the suffering, it challenges us to rethink everything we believe about why things happen the way they do. As we journey through the ashes of Job's life, we'll witness a conversation unlike any other in ancient literature. A debate between friends that turns into a courtroom drama, and ultimately, an encounter between creature and creator that will leave both forever changed. Job's voice echoes across thousands of years, speaking to our deepest fears and highest hopes. His questions are our questions. His pain is our pain. And perhaps his path through the darkness might illuminate our own. Let us begin where all great stories begin. Not with answers, but with questions. Not with certainty, but with wonder. Let us sit for a while on the ash heap with Job and listen to what wisdom might come from the lips of a righteous man who dared to call God to account. Our story unfolds in the land of Uz, somewhere in the ancient Near East, in a time before kings ruled Israel. This places Job in a world vastly different from our own. A world where a person's place in society was fixed by birth, where life and death hung in careful balance, and where the gods were thought to control every aspect of human existence. In Job's world, most people believed in a simple rule. Good things happen to good people, and bad things happen to bad people. The proper order of things meant that virtue brought reward and sin brought punishment. This belief system, known as retributive justice, formed the backbone of ancient morality across the Near East, from Babylon to Egypt. Picture the ancient marketplace, where merchants and buyers haggle over prices, where gossip and news spread from caravan to caravan. Here, a person's name, their reputation, mattered above all else. Job was known as blameless and upright, words that carried the weight of the highest praise. In a culture where honor defined a person's worth, Job stood at the very pinnacle. The story of Job belongs to a special kind of literature called wisdom writing. Unlike historical accounts or legal codes, wisdom literature wrestles with the deeper questions of human existence. Why are we here? How should we live? Can we understand the mind of God? These writings often take the form of poetry, proverbs, or dramatic dialogues. Job's tale stands alongside other ancient works that question the nature of suffering and divine justice. From Mesopotamia came The Righteous Sufferer, a poem about a good man afflicted by the gods. From Egypt came The Dispute Over Suicide, which pondered whether life was worth living in the face of injustice. These ancient voices all struggled with the same mystery. Why doesn't the world work the way we think it should? The genius of Job's story lies in its literary form. It begins and ends with simple storytelling prose, giving us the basic facts of what happened. But the heart of the book unfolds as poetry, rich, complex verses that soar with beauty even as they plunge into depths of despair. This mix of styles hints that we're dealing with something more than just history. We're entering the realm of truth that transcends mere facts. Written sometime between the 7th and 4th centuries BCE, the Book of Job emerged during a time when many ancient cultures were questioning traditional religious ideas. As empires rose and fell, as peoples were conquered and displaced, the old certainties about divine favor seemed less and less convincing. Job's story speaks directly to this crisis of faith. It takes the conventional wisdom about suffering and turns it inside out. Rather than offering neat solutions, it invites us into the whirlwind of doubt, protest, and mystery. It suggests that some truths lie beyond human understanding, yet still we must seek them. So as we step into this ancient world, let's leave behind our modern assumptions. Job's story isn't simply about patience in suffering, as later traditions sometimes portrayed it. It's about the courage to question, the passion to protest, and ultimately the humility to stand in awe before the mysteries of existence that no human mind can fully grasp. Every great drama needs compelling characters, and Job's story introduces us to figures who have captivated imagination for centuries, each one representing different approaches to life's most difficult questions. At the center stands Job himself, a man whose very name has become synonymous with patience and endurance. But this common perception barely scratches the surface of his complex character. Job is a wealthy landowner from Uz, respected by all who know him. With 7 sons and 3 daughters, vast herds of livestock, and many servants, he embodies success in his ancient world. Yet material wealth doesn't define him. His integrity does. The text describes him as blameless and upright, a man who feared God and shunned evil. He's compassionate to the poor, fair in his business dealings, and faithful in his religious duties. Job isn't perfect, but he strives to live with complete integrity. His greatest strength, soon to be tested beyond measure, is his authentic relationship with God, one built not on blind obedience, but on genuine trust. Then there is God, portrayed not as a distant deity, but as an active participant in human affairs. The God of Job's story holds regular meetings with heavenly beings, engages in dialogue, and even enters into a wager regarding human faithfulness. This is not an impersonal force, but a being with will, purpose, and personality. God appears first as Job's benefactor, then seemingly as his tormentor, and finally as his challenger and restorer. The divine character in this drama defies simple categories, neither fully comforting nor fully terrifying, but utterly sovereign and ultimately mysterious. One of the most intriguing figures is the accuser, or in Hebrew, Ha-Satan. This is not yet the devil of later religious tradition, but rather a role or function, something like a prosecuting attorney in the divine court. His name means adversary or obstructor. He appears among the sons of God, divine beings who form God's council, with a specific job, testing the authenticity of human virtue. The accuser doesn't believe anyone serves God for nothing. He suspects that behind every righteous action lies self-interest. Does Job fear God for nothing? He asks, setting the entire drama in motion with a simple question that strikes at the heart of human motivation and faith. Finally, we meet Job's friends, Eliphaz from Teman, Bildad from Shua, and Zophar from Naamah, later joined by a younger man named Elihu from Buz. These men journey from their homes to comfort their suffering friend. They begin with good intentions, sitting silently with Job for 7 days and nights. But when Job finally breaks his silence with bitter complaints, they feel compelled to defend God's justice. Each friend represents a different aspect of conventional wisdom about suffering. Eliphaz appeals to personal spiritual experience. Bildad relies on traditional teachings handed down through generations. Zophar confidently asserts that God's ways are beyond human understanding, so Job should simply repent. Later, Elihu will claim to bring fresh insight, presenting suffering as God's way of teaching and refining human character. These characters create a complex web of relationships and viewpoints. Job stands at the intersection of heaven and earth, caught between divine testing and human judgment. His friends represent the limitations of human wisdom when confronted with profound suffering. The accuser embodies skepticism about human goodness, and God remains the ultimate mystery, both the source of Job's troubles and his only hope for redemption. As their drama unfolds across ancient desert sands, these figures ask questions that still echo today. Can goodness exist without reward? How do we make sense of innocent suffering? And what happens when human understanding reaches its limits in the face of cosmic mysteries? The Book of Job unfolds like a carefully crafted play, moving between different literary styles to create a powerful exploration of suffering and faith. Understanding its unique structure helps us appreciate the brilliance of this ancient text. The story opens with a prose prologue, chapters 1 and 2, written in straightforward narrative style. Here we meet Job, learn about his virtuous life, and witness the heavenly wager that will test his faith. The prose reads like a folktale, setting up the dramatic situation with clear, simple language. We see Job lose his wealth, his children, and his health in rapid succession. We watch his wife counsel him to curse God and die, and we meet the three friends who come to comfort him, sitting in silence for 7 days before anyone speaks a word. Then, something remarkable happens. When Job finally opens his mouth in chapter 3, the text suddenly transforms from prose into poetry. From chapter 3 through chapter 42:6, the book becomes a poetic masterpiece, rich with metaphor, vivid imagery, and complex arguments. This shift signals that we've moved from simple storytelling into the realm of profound philosophical exploration. The poetic section begins with Job's lament, followed by 3 cycles of speeches between Job and his friends. Each friend speaks and Job responds, a pattern that creates a rhythm of accusation and defense, like a courtroom drama where Job stands trial before both human and divine judges. As the debate progresses, the friends become increasingly hostile, while Job grows more defiant in claiming his innocence. This dialogue structure serves an important purpose. It allows different perspectives on suffering to be voiced, examined, and ultimately found wanting. The friends represent conventional wisdom about divine justice, while Job speaks from the raw reality of innocent suffering. Neither can fully explain what's happening. Near the end of these dialogue cycles, a 4th figure appears, Elihu, a younger man who claims to bring fresh insight. His lengthy speeches, chapters 32 to 37, serve as a bridge between the human debate and what follows. God's dramatic entrance onto the scene. The climax of the book arrives with God's speeches from the whirlwind, chapters 38 to 41. Here, divine poetry reaches its highest expression as God bombards Job with questions about the creation and governance of the cosmos. These speeches don't directly address Job's suffering, but instead invite him into a wider perspective on reality. Rather than explaining why bad things happen to good people, God reveals the vastness and complexity of a universe that transcends human understanding. Job's brief response marks the transition back to prose. The epilogue, 42:7 to 17, returns to the simple narrative style of the beginning, creating a frame around the poetic heart of the book. Here we see God rebuke Job's friends, accept Job's humble response, and restore his fortunes. The story ends with Job blessed with new children, greater wealth than before, and a long life. This elegantly structured text, moving from prose to poetry and back to prose, mirrors Job's journey from prosperity through suffering to restoration. But the simple ending doesn't erase the profound questions raised in the poetic middle. The neat frame of the prologue and epilogue contains but doesn't fully resolve the messy, complex wrestling with God that forms the heart of the book. Like a symphony with contrasting movements, the Book of Job uses literary form to express its deeper meaning. The tension between storytelling and poetry, between simple moral lessons and profound existential questions, creates a literary masterpiece that has challenged and comforted readers for over 2,000 years. At its heart, the Book of Job explores timeless questions that have troubled human hearts since ancient days. These themes weave together like threads in a tapestry, creating a rich picture of the human struggle to make sense of a world where suffering seems random and justice elusive. The most obvious theme is innocent suffering. Job loses everything through no fault of his own. This challenges the common belief that suffering is always deserved punishment for wrongdoing. Job's story forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that bad things happen to good people. Through Job's anguished cries, we hear the voice of everyone who has ever suffered and asked, "Why me?" His pain speaks to cancer patients, refugees fleeing war, parents who have lost children, anyone who has experienced tragedy they didn't deserve. Closely linked to suffering is the theme of divine justice. Job's friends insist that God always rewards the righteous and punishes the wicked. This belief in perfect cosmic justice provides comfort. It means we live in a fair, orderly universe where actions have predictable consequences. But Job's experience shatters this neat equation. The disconnect between his righteousness and his suffering creates the central tension of the story. Is God just? If so, how can we explain innocent suffering? The book doesn't offer simple answers, but it does suggest that divine justice operates on levels beyond human understanding. Faith under pressure forms another crucial theme. When everything is taken from him, Job refuses to curse God and die, as his wife suggests. Yet his faith isn't blind or passive. He questions, argues, and demands answers from God. Job shows us that authentic faith can include doubt, anger, and protest. His story redefines faithfulness not as quiet acceptance of whatever happens, but as passionate engagement with God even in life's darkest moments. The limits of human wisdom emerge as we listen to Job and his friends debate. Each person speaks with confidence about how the world works and why things happen as they do. Each one believes they understand God's ways, yet their explanations fall short, revealing how little humans truly comprehend about the cosmos and its creator. The book humbles all human attempts to fully explain suffering or to speak with certainty about divine purposes. The nature of God stands at the center of Job's questions. Is God a cosmic accountant who precisely measures out rewards and punishments, a distant ruler unconcerned with human suffering, or something else entirely? The God who eventually speaks from the whirlwind is neither the vengeful deity Job's friends describe, nor the absent God Job sometimes fears. Instead, we encounter a creator passionately engaged with every aspect of the natural world, from the birth of mountain goats to the feeding of young ravens. This God is both more mysterious and more intimately involved with creation than human theology can capture. The book also explores the value of human life. Job at times wishes he had never been born, questioning whether existence is worth the pain it brings. His lament forces us to consider what makes life meaningful when suffering strips away everything we value. Is human life precious only when it's pleasant and productive, or does it retain inherent worth even in the depths of misery? Finally, Job examines the complex relationship between the individual and community. When disaster strikes, Job becomes isolated. His friends who come to comfort him end up adding to his pain with their judgments. His story reminds us how suffering can separate us from others at the very time we most need connection. And how friends can become accusers when they cling too tightly to their theological certainties. These themes don't remain abstract in Job's story. They take flesh in his tears, in the friends' increasingly heated arguments, and ultimately in God's appearance in the whirlwind. Together, they create a profound meditation on what it means to be human in a world where suffering remains a mystery and where encounters with the divine leave us changed, but still questioning. In the land of Uz lived a man named Job. If you had visited his home in those days before trouble came, you would have seen abundance everywhere you looked. His house stood large and welcoming, with rooms enough for his 7 sons and 3 daughters to gather for regular feasts. Fields stretched in every direction, dotted with his livestock, 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys. Servants bustled about, tending to the daily work of a great household. But Job's wealth went deeper than possessions. Walking through the city gate, you would have noticed how people fell silent when he approached, how elders stood in his presence, how young men stepped aside from his path. Job was, as the text tells us, the greatest man among all the people of the East. His opinion carried weight in community decisions. His wisdom settled disputes. His generosity eased the suffering of widows and orphans. Each morning before sunrise, Job could be found preparing sacrifices for each of his children. Perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts, he would think as he performed these rituals. Such was his concern not just for his family's physical well-being, but for their spiritual health as well. Job's righteousness wasn't a mask he wore for public approval. It flowed from his deep reverence for God and genuine concern for others. Later in the story, when defending himself, Job would describe how he lived. "I rescued the poor who cried for help, and the fatherless who had none to assist them. I was eyes to the blind and feet to the lame. I was a father to the needy." These weren't empty boasts, but the pattern of a life built on compassion. What made Job truly remarkable wasn't just that he did the right things, but why he did them. He didn't practice virtue to gain divine favor or human praise. Goodness had become his nature, integrity his habit. He walked blameless and upright. Two words that together both external behavior and an internal character. Job wasn't perfect. No human is. But he strived to live with such consistency that there would be no gap between his public actions and private thoughts. In a world full of religious hypocrisy, where many performed righteous deeds while harboring corrupt hearts, Job stood out as authentically good. His prosperity seemed the natural outcome of his virtue, a fitting reward for his exemplary life. Everyone who knew Job could point to him as proof that the moral universe worked exactly as it should. The righteous prosper, the wicked suffer. His life appeared to be a perfect example of divine justice in action. Picture Job at this moment before disaster struck. A respected leader sitting at his gate, surrounded by family, blessed with wealth, secure in his relationship with God. He has no idea that his very goodness has made him the subject of a cosmic wager, that his comfortable world is about to collapse, or that his name will become forever linked with the mystery of suffering. The idyllic opening of Job's story serves an important purpose. By establishing his impeccable character and remarkable prosperity, the narrative creates the stark contrast needed for what follows. The higher Job climbs in virtue and blessing, the more devastating his fall will appear, and the more challenging the questions his suffering will raise. As readers or listeners, we're invited to remember this initial picture of Job throughout the story. When we later see him scraping his sores on an ash heap, when we hear him cry out in anguish, when his friends accuse him of secret sins, we know something they don't. We know the man Job truly was before calamity struck, and that knowledge makes the mystery of his suffering all the more profound. While Job tends his flocks and cares for his family, unaware of forces gathering beyond human sight, the scene shifts dramatically to the courts of heaven. Here, in a realm beyond earthly understanding, spiritual beings assemble before the throne of God. The text calls them the sons of God, divine beings who form God's heavenly council. Picture this celestial gathering, where messengers who have traversed the cosmos bring reports from distant corners of creation. Among these shining beings appears a different sort of figure, the accuser, Ha-Satan in Hebrew. This is not yet the devil of later tradition, but rather a role or function in the divine court. The word Satan means adversary or obstructor, suggesting one who challenges and tests. "Where have you come from?" God asks the accuser, opening a conversation that will change Job's life forever. From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it, comes the reply. A chilling reminder that this testing figure moves freely through the human world, observing and evaluating. Then God does something unexpected. He points out Job, singling him out as a model of human goodness. "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." These divine words of praise should settle any question about Job's character. God himself testifies to Job's exceptional virtue. Yet instead of agreeing, the accuser raises a profound question about the very nature of human goodness. Does Job fear God for nothing? With this simple query, the accuser suggests that Job's righteousness isn't genuine virtue at all, but merely self-interest dressed as piety. "Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands, so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." The charge is devastating in its implications. It suggests that no one, not even the most seemingly virtuous person, truly loves goodness for its own sake. "Remove the rewards," says the accuser, "and you'll reveal the hollow core of human righteousness." Job serves God not from genuine reverence, but because it has made him wealthy and respected. His virtue is just a business arrangement, devotion exchanged for divine protection. God accepts the challenge. Very well then, everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger. With these words, Job's fate is sealed, though he knows nothing of this heavenly conversation. The hedge of protection is removed, not because Job has sinned, but because his righteousness has made him the test case for all humanity. This scene in heaven raises profound questions about divine governance. Does God gamble with human lives? Does he need to prove anything to spiritual beings? Why would an all-knowing God need to test Job's faithfulness? The text doesn't fully answer these questions, maintaining the mystery of divine purposes. What this heavenly counsel does reveal is that reality contains layers beyond human perception. Job will soon experience devastating losses, but neither he nor his friends will know about this conversation that explains why. They will struggle to make sense of his suffering using the limited theological frameworks available to them, unaware that Job's personal tragedy serves a larger purpose in a cosmic drama. The wager established in heaven creates dramatic tension for the audience. We know what Job doesn't, that his response to suffering will answer the accuser's challenge about whether humans can love God and goodness for their own sake, apart from any reward. As we watch Job's world collapse around him, we're drawn into the test ourselves, wondering, what would remain of our own faith if everything else was taken away? The day began like any other for Job. Perhaps he was reviewing accounts with his servants or making plain plans for the seasonal shearing when the first messenger arrived, breathless and bearing news that would shatter his world forever. The oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby, the servant gasped, when the Sabeans attacked and took them. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. Before Job could absorb this blow, the loss of livelihood and innocent lives, a second messenger rushed in. His clothes were singed, his face blackened with soot. The fire of God fell from the heavens and burned up the sheep and the servants, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. The sheep, 7,000 of them, gone in an instant. More servants dead. And this time the disaster seemed to come not from human raiders, but from God himself. Fire from heaven suggested divine judgment, though Job knew of no sin that would warrant such punishment. While this messenger was still speaking, a third arrived. The Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and swept down on your camels and took them. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. 3,000 camels, representing wealth, transportation, and trading power, stolen by enemies. More servants killed. Job's vast fortune was disappearing before his eyes, disaster striking from all directions at once. Then came the final messenger, bearing news so terrible it made the previous losses seem small by comparison. Your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed on them and they are dead, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. In a single day, Job lost everything that defined his place in the world, his wealth, his servants, and most devastatingly, all 10 of his children. The speed and completeness of the destruction was overwhelming. No one had ever seen calamity strike so suddenly and so thoroughly. How does a person respond to such total loss? The ancient world expected dramatic displays of grief, tearing clothes, shaving the head, wailing loudly, perhaps even questioning God's justice. Job did tear his robe and shave his head, traditional signs of mourning, but then he did something remarkable. He fell to the ground in worship. "Naked I came from my mother's womb," Job said, "and naked I will depart. The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised." These words reveal a man whose faith ran deeper than his circumstances. Job acknowledged God's sovereignty over both giving and taking. He recognized that nothing he possessed, not wealth, not even beloved children, ultimately belonged to him. Everything was a gift, temporarily entrusted to his care. The text adds a significant commentary. In all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. This doesn't mean Job felt no grief or asked no questions. It means that even in the depths of unfathomable loss, he refused to accuse God of injustice. Job's initial response passes the first test posed in the heavenly court. The accuser had predicted that the loss of blessings would reveal Job's faith as merely transactional. Take away the benefits, and he would curse God to your face. Instead, Job demonstrated that his reverence for God transcended what God gave him. Yet this was only the beginning of Job's trial. Having lost his possessions and his children, his own body remained untouched. The test of faith would soon grow even more intense, pushing Job beyond what any human should have to bear. As night fell after that terrible day, Job lay among the ashes of his former life, unaware that his response to catastrophe had already proved something profound about human capacity for genuine devotion. In his grief, he couldn't know that his words of acceptance, "The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away," would echo through history, like bringing comfort to countless sufferers in the centuries to come. As dawn broke after Job's devastating losses, the heavenly court gathered once more. Despite the complete destruction of Job's fortune and family, the accuser remained unsatisfied. Job had maintained his integrity in the face of external losses, but would his faith survive if the suffering became personal, etched into his very flesh? "Skin for skin," the accuser declared to God, using a phrase that probably referred to ancient trading practices. "A man will give all he has for his own life, but stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face." The implication was clear. Job might accept the loss of possessions and even children, but self-preservation would ultimately reveal his true character. When pain became personal enough, his piety would crumble. Again, God permitted the test with one crucial limit. "Very well then, he is in your hands, but you must spare his life." Job would suffer to the edge of death, but not beyond it. Soon after this heavenly exchange, Job was struck with painful sores from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. The Hebrew describes these as severe boils, but this clinical term hardly captures the agony. Modern scholars suggest the affliction might have been anything from a severe form of leprosy to a skin disease called pemphigus foliaceus, which creates burning blisters that leave the skin looking like it has been burned by fire. Whatever the precise condition, Job's suffering was immense. His appearance became so altered that his friends would later barely recognize him. The itching was relentless, driving him to take a piece of broken pottery to scrape himself. This small detail reveals volumes about his condition. His fingers were either too painful to use or too ineffective against the torment of his skin. Unable to remain in his home, perhaps because his condition made him ritually unclean, perhaps because the sight and smell of his affliction repelled others, Job retreated to the town ash heap. This was where garbage was burned, where outcasts gathered, where those deemed unworthy of normal society existence spent their days. Sitting in ashes was a sign of mourning, but for Job, it became his dwelling place. It was here, at his lowest moment, that Job's wife approached him. She had lost everything too: her children, her comfortable life, her respected place in society. Now her husband, once the greatest man in the East, sat disfigured on a garbage pile. We can hear her own grief and disillusionment in her stark advice: "Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die." Her words might seem harsh, but they came from a place of shattered faith. If this was how God rewarded righteousness, what was the point of continuing to believe? Better to renounce God, invite divine execution, and end the suffering quickly. Job's response revealed his spiritual strength even in physical weakness. "You are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" Again, the narrator adds the crucial observation. In all this, Job did not sin in what he said. Despite losing everything, wealth, children, health, dignity, and even the support of his wife, Job refused to curse God. The second test, like the first, failed to prove the accuser's cynical view of human faith. But this is not simply a story about patient endurance. What follows will reveal the complex reality of faith under pressure. Job's initial acceptance will give way to questions, protests, and even accusations against God. His story doesn't present an unrealistic picture of saintly submission, but the messy reality of a genuine relationship with the divine. For now, though, Job sits in silence on the ash heap, scraping his sores, mourning his losses, perhaps wondering if death might indeed be preferable to continued suffering. The heavenly wager has brought him lower than any human should have to go. And still, the worst pain may lie ahead. Not physical torment, but the well-meaning counsel of friends who will try to explain his suffering and only succeed in deepening his wounds. Word of Job's catastrophic losses spread quickly through the ancient trade routes. 3 men, Eliphaz from Teman, Bildad from Shuah, and Zophar from Naamah, heard the news and made a pact to visit their friend. These weren't casual acquaintances, but dear companions who felt compelled to sympathize with him and comfort him in his hour of need. Each man came from a different region, suggesting Job's reputation and relationships extended far beyond his homeland. Eliphaz likely traveled from Edom, known for its wisdom traditions. Bildad may have journeyed from the Arabian desert. Zophar's homeland is less certain, but all 3 represented the best of ancient Near Eastern theological understanding. Picture these men approaching from different directions, perhaps meeting at a crossroads before making the final journey to Job's home together. They would have prepared themselves for a difficult reunion, but nothing could have prepared them for what they saw. When they spotted Job from a distance, sitting on the ash heap outside town, they could barely recognize him. The wealthy landowner, once dignified and healthy, had become a disfigured shadow of himself, his skin covered with painful sores, his body wasted by illness. The text tells us they began to weep aloud. Their grief was genuine, an honest response to the shocking transformation of their beloved friend. They tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads, traditional gestures that expressed deep mourning and solidarity with the sufferer. Then these 3 friends did something truly remarkable, something that showed both wisdom and compassion beyond the theological arguments they would later offer. They sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word to him because they saw how great his suffering was. This silent presence was their finest moment. In the face of overwhelming loss, they recognized that no words could adequately address Job's pain. Sometimes the greatest comfort comes not from explanations or advice, but from simple presence. The willingness to sit beside someone in their darkest hour. 7 days and nights they maintained this compassionate silence. For a full week they shared Job's discomfort, sitting on the ground rather than on cushions, exposed to the elements, abstaining from normal activities. Their silence created space for Job's grief, acknowledging through their presence that his suffering mattered. These days of wordless companionship created a stark contrast to what would follow. Once Job broke his silence with a bitter lament, once he dared to question why he was born into a world of such suffering, the friends would abandon their compassionate presence for increasingly rigid arguments. Their desire to defend God's justice would override their ability to comfort their friend. But for now, in this sacred pause before the debate began, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar demonstrated the essence of true friendship: the courage to enter another's pain without flinching, the humility to acknowledge that some suffering lies beyond explanation, and the patience to sit in uncomfortable silence rather than filling the air with empty words. The ash heap became a meeting place of broken hearts. Job in his physical torment, the friends in their helpless witness to his suffering, all confronted with the fragility of human life and the mystery of undeserved pain. As the sun set on the 7th day, none of them knew that their silent vigil would soon erupt into one of history's most profound theological debates. Job was reaching the limit of silent endurance. Soon he would give voice to the questions that had surely been building within him through these days of suffering, questions that would challenge conventional wisdom about God, justice, and the meaning of human existence. The quiet before this storm held its own significance. It created space for the deepest questions to form. It established the care and concern that bound these 4 men together, even as their views would sharply diverge. And it reminds us, thousands of years later, that sometimes the most powerful response to suffering is not explanation but presence, the simple gift of refusing to leave someone alone in their pain. 7 days and nights pass in stillness. Job sits motionless on the ash heap, his friends beside him without words. The silence wraps around them like a shroud, until at last Job's voice breaks through the quiet. What comes forth is not acceptance, but raw anguish that tears at the fabric of heaven itself. "May the day of my birth perish," Job cries out, his voice trembling with sorrow. "May that day turn to darkness. May God above not care about it. May no light shine on it." His words fall like stones into still water, each one sending ripples across the ancient desert. This is no polite prayer. This is the howl of a wounded soul. Job doesn't merely question his circumstances, he questions his very existence. "Why did I not die at birth, come forth from the womb, and expire?" The man once known for his blessings now wishes he had never drawn breath. Job paints a haunting picture of what might have been, if then, the peace of joining kings and rulers in their grand tombs, or the simple mercy of sharing the quiet of stillborn infants. "There the wicked cease from troubling, and there the weary are at rest," he whispers, his eyes distant with longing. Through his lament, Job never directly accuses God. Yet his questions hang heavy in the air. Why give light to those in misery? Why grant life to those who long for death? The former prince of the East now scratches his sores with a broken pottery shard, wondering why he must continue each painful breath. Job doesn't ask for his wealth back. He doesn't plead for his children to return from the grave. He asks the most fundamental question: why must I exist at all, if only to suffer? His words carry no hope of resolution, only the raw truth of his pain. The poetry of his lament reveals a man whose soul is laid bare. The perfect circle of his life, his righteousness, his blessings, his confidence in divine order, has shattered. What remains is a man who cannot reconcile his faith with his reality. In the ancient world, such words were shocking. To curse one's birth was to question the gift of the divine. Yet Job holds nothing back. The neat boxes of blessing and curse, of reward and punishment, lie broken around him. His friends listen in horror as their simple theologies begin to crumble. Job's lament doesn't just express grief, it announces the beginning of his quest for answers. No longer will he accept simple platitudes about divine justice. He has passed beyond fear of speaking his truth. With his children gone, his body ravaged, and his future empty, what more could he lose? The sun sets on Job's bitter words, casting long shadows across the ash heap. The stage is set for a debate that will shake the foundations of faith. His three friends exchange glances, their silence now broken. They must speak, must correct this dangerous path. And so Eliphaz, the eldest, clears his throat and prepares to respond. Job doesn't immediately lash out at Eliphaz. Instead, he begins by justifying the weight of his lament. "If my anguish were weighed, and my calamity laid in the scales," he sighs, "they would outweigh the sand of the seas." His pain isn't trivial. It's vast and overwhelming, pressing down on his chest with each breath. "The arrows of the Almighty have pierced him," Job explains. His spirit drains away like water in the desert sand. "Even wild animals don't cry out without reason," he reminds his friend. His complaints come from genuine suffering, not mere discontent. Then Job addresses the heart of Eliphaz's argument, that he must have sinned to deserve such pain. "Show me where I have erred," he challenges, his voice gaining strength despite his weakness. Job doesn't claim sinless perfection, but he knows in his heart that his suffering doesn't match any wrongdoing. What cuts deepest is not the loss of wealth or even health, but the betrayal of friendship. "My brothers have dealt deceitfully like a brook," Job says, his eyes fixed on Eliphaz. He compares his friends to seasonal streams that overflow when least needed, but dry up during drought when travelers desperately seek water. "You see my calamity, and are afraid," Job observes with bitter insight. His friends fear the implications of his suffering. If the righteous can suffer without cause, what protection do any of them have? Their theology provides a buffer against the terror of a world where bad things happen randomly, even to good people. Job doesn't want grand gestures from his friends. Did I say, "Bring me something," or "Pay a ransom for me from your wealth"? All he wants is understanding, someone to sit with him in his pain without trying to explain it away or find fault in him. The wounded man then turns his face toward heaven. His true argument isn't with Eliphaz, but with God himself. "Does not man have hard service on earth?" he asks the sky. Life is brief and full of troubles. A hired hand longing for evening shadows, a worker eager for wages. Job's nights stretch endlessly as he tosses on his bed, his skin breaking and oozing afresh with each movement. When I say, "My bed will comfort me," then you frighten me with dreams and terrify me with visions, he cries out to the silent heavens. In perhaps his most honest moment, Job admits he would rather die than continue this suffering. "I loathe my life," he confesses. "I would not live forever." Yet even in this dark place, a spark of dignity remains. Job refuses to deny his integrity simply to make his friends comfortable. As his response ends, Job turns his gaze directly to God. "Why have you made me your target?" The question hangs in the air, unanswered. Neither Eliphaz's platitudes nor heaven's silence can quench Job's demand for understanding. Bildad the Shuhite can no longer contain himself. Where Eliphaz spoke with the gentle wisdom of age, Bildad speaks with the harsh certainty of tradition. "How long will you say these things?" he demands, his voice sharp with frustration. "The words of your mouth are a mighty wind." For Bildad, the matter is simple. God does not pervert justice. This is the bedrock truth upon which all else stands. If Job's children sinned against God, then their punishment was deserved. The statement lands like a slap across Job's grief-stricken face. "If you were pure and upright," Bildad continues, his logic marching forward without mercy, "surely God would awake for you." The implication cuts deep. Job's continued suffering serves as proof of guilt. If he would only repent, God would restore his rightful place. Bildad anchors his argument in history. "Please inquire of past generations," he urges, "and consider the things searched out by their fathers." Wisdom doesn't come from one man's experience, but from the collected knowledge of ancestors. And what do they say? "The wicked perish while the blameless prosper." He paints vivid pictures to illustrate his point. The godless man is like papyrus without marsh water, withering faster than other plants. His confidence is as fragile as a spider's web, easily torn apart when leaned upon. Such people flourish briefly in the sun, but are soon forgotten, their place filled by others. Unlike Eliphaz, who couched his rebuke in visions and possibilities, Bildad speaks with absolute certainty. The equation is perfect in his mind. Righteousness equals blessing. Suffering equals punishment. No exceptions exist in his orderly universe. Yet even in his harshness, Bildad offers hope. God will not reject a blameless person, he assures Job. The path forward is clear. Confess, repent, and watch as God fills Job's mouth with laughter and his lips with shouts of joy. His enemies will be clothed in shame, while Job's tent will stand restored. Bildad believes he offers kindness through honesty. In his mind, false comfort would only delay Job's repentance and healing. Better the harsh truth that leads to restoration than gentle lies that prolong suffering. What Bildad cannot see is how his rigid theology blinds him to the man sitting before him. Job's integrity becomes collateral damage in Bildad's defense of divine justice. To preserve his understanding of God, Bildad must sacrifice his friend's truth. As the last words of his speech fade into the desert air, Bildad sits back with the satisfaction of one who has spoken necessary truth. But in Job's eyes, a new pain appears, the wound of being misunderstood by those who should know him best. "Indeed, I know it is so," Job begins, his voice weary yet resolute. "But how can a mortal be righteous before God?" With these words, Job shifts the debate to deeper waters. He doesn't deny God's justice. He questions whether any human can stand blameless before divine perfection. If God chose to contend with him, Job explains, he couldn't answer one charge in 1,000. The Creator's wisdom and power are beyond measure. God moves mountains without warning, shakes the earth from its place, commands the sun, and seals up the stars. Who can challenge such might? "Though I were righteous, my own mouth would condemn me," Job admits. Even if perfect, he would lack the language to defend himself before the Almighty. The gap between Creator and created is too vast for human justice to bridge. Yet amid this acknowledgement of God's power, Job reveals his deepest wound, the seeming indifference of divine justice. "If a disaster brings sudden death, God mocks the despair of the innocent," he observes. In Job's shattered world, the wicked prosper while blameless men like himself suffer without cause. His days vanish swifter than a runner, fleeing without seeing good. Like ships of reed, like eagles swooping down, his life rushes toward its end without tasting joy again. And if he tries to forget his pain, put on a brave face, he knows his sufferings will not be counted as nothing. If I wash myself with snow, Job says, painting a vivid image, and cleanse my hands with lye, yet you will plunge me into the pit, and my own clothes would abhor me. No amount of self-purification can bridge the gap between human and divine. What Job longs for is what cannot exist, a mediator who could stand between him and God, someone who could lay a hand on them both. Without such an arbiter, Job remains trapped between heaven's silence and earth's accusations. He is not a man as I am, that I may answer him, Job sighs, looking upward. The fundamental unfairness of his position weighs heavily. How can the pot question the potter? Yet this is precisely what Job dares to do, driven by the conviction of his integrity. Unlike his friends, Job refuses to distort either his experience or his understanding of God to make them fit together neatly. He holds both his suffering and God's sovereignty in tension, unwilling to simplify either to resolve the contradiction. As darkness falls across the ash heap, Job concludes his response to Bildad with a plea that reveals his exhaustion. Remove your hand from me, and let not dread of you make me afraid. Even as he challenges God, Job acknowledges his smallness before divine power, yet he refuses to surrender the truth he knows, that his suffering does not match his sin. Zophar the Naamathite has listened to enough. The youngest of Job's three friends, he lacks both Eliphaz's gentle approach and Bildad's appeal to tradition. Instead, Zophar attacks with naked impatience. Should your empty talk silence men, he begins, his words sharp as thorns. Should you mock with no one to make you ashamed? Where the others at least acknowledge Job's pain, Zophar seems irritated by it. You say, my doctrine is pure and I am clean in God's eyes, he scoffs. Job's defense of his innocence strikes Zophar as arrogance, a man presuming to stand righteous before God. Then comes perhaps the harshest statement any friend has made. Know then that God exacts from you less than your guilt deserves. Not only does Job deserve his suffering, Zophar suggests, but God has actually been merciful by not punishing him more severely. Zophar paints God as beyond human understanding. Can you find out the deep things of God? Can you find out the limit of the Almighty, he asks. Unlike Job, who wrestles honestly with divine silence, Zophar uses God's mystery as a cudgel to silence questions. The logic unfolds with brutal simplicity. God knows the hearts of men. God sees Job's wickedness. Therefore, Job's protestations of innocence only add the flying to whatever other transgressions he's committed. If you prepare your heart, Zophar advises with cold certainty, and stretch out your hands toward him. If iniquity is in your hand, put it far away. The path forward is clear. Job must confess and repent, abandoning his claim of innocence. The rewards of such repentance, Zophar promises, would be substantial. Then you will lift up your face without blemish. You will be steadfast and will not fear. Job could forget his misery, remembering it only as waters that have passed by. His life would shine brighter than noonday. For all his harshness, Zophar believes he speaks truth in love. In his mind, he offers the sick man medicine, bitter to taste but necessary for healing. False comfort would only keep Job from the repentance he needs for restoration. Yet Zophar's confidence reveals his fundamental misunderstanding. He presumes to know both God's mind and Job's heart. Unlike Eliphaz, who at least based his counsel on a vision, or Bildad, who looked to ancestral wisdom, Zophar offers nothing but his own certainty. As the sun climbs higher in the sky, casting shorter shadows across the ash heap, Zophar concludes his rebuke. He sits back with the satisfaction of one who has spoken necessary truth, unaware that his words have widened the gulf between himself and his suffering friend. No doubt you are the people, and wisdom will die with you, Job begins, his words dripping with bitter sarcasm. The gentle man who once counseled kings now wields irony like a weapon. But I have understanding as well as you. I am not inferior to you. The mockery cuts deeper because of who Job once was. Respected, wise, a pillar of the community. I have become a laughingstock to my friends, he laments, though I called on God, and he answered me. The once righteous man now serves as a cautionary tale for others, a warning of how quickly fortune can turn. Job points out the cruel irony of his situation. The one who is at ease has contempt for misfortune. Those who've never faced disaster find it easy to judge those struck by calamity. The tents of robbers are at peace, he observes, noting how the wicked often prosper while the righteous suffer. Then Job shifts his focus from his friends to the natural world around them. "Ask the beasts, and they will teach you," he says, gesturing toward the hills beyond the ash heap. "The birds of the air, the fish of the sea, all of them know that the Lord's hand has done this." Every living thing exists at God's pleasure. "In his hand is the life of every living thing and the breath of all mankind," Job affirms. God's power is absolute. If he tears down, none can rebuild. If he shuts someone in, none can open. With these words, Job reveals the gap in his friends' thinking. They speak as if defending God's justice, yet Job's vision of divine power surpasses theirs. The God Job worships isn't constrained by human notions of fairness. He acts according to his own wisdom, beyond human understanding. He makes nations great, and he destroys them. Job continues, his voice gathering strength. He takes away understanding from the chiefs of the people and makes them wander in a trackless waste. God's sovereignty extends over all creation, including human affairs. Job turns from description to direct challenge. "Behold, my eye has seen all this. My ear has heard and understood it." He doesn't need his friend's simplistic theology. He knows God's power firsthand, both as the source of his former blessings and his current trials. Then comes the devastating indictment. "As for you, you whitewash with lies. Worthless physicians are you all." Job rejects their false comfort, their easy answers that gloss over the complexity of suffering. "Will you speak falsely for God and speak deceitfully for him?" he demands. In a stunning reversal, Job positions himself as God's defender against his friend's shallow theology. "He will surely rebuke you if you show partiality," he warns them. God needs no human defenders, least of all those who distort truth to make it fit their understanding. As the shadows lengthen across the ash heap, Job concludes with a bold declaration of intent. "Though he slay me, I will hope in him, yet I will argue my ways to his face." Even as he maintains his trust in God, Job refuses to surrender his right to question, to seek understanding of his suffering. The sun dips toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the ash heap. Job's gaze turns inward as he considers not just his own suffering, but the broader human experience. "Man who is born of woman is few of days and full of trouble," he begins, his voice soft yet clear in the evening air. Life's brevity haunts his words. "He comes out like a flower and withers. He flees like a shadow and continues not." In the vast span of time, human lives flash by in an instant, fragile and fleeting against the backdrop of eternity. Job marvels at how God pays such close attention to these brief lives. "You have fixed his limits that he cannot pass," he observes. "Each person's days are numbered, boundaries set that none can cross. The watches over creatures who live and die in the blink of cosmic time." The wounded man then offers a striking comparison between humans and trees. "For there is hope for a tree. If it's cut down, it will sprout again, and its shoots will not cease." Even when felled, a tree may send forth new growth from ancient roots. Though its root grows old in the earth and its stump dies in the soil, yet at the scent of water it will bud. But humans enjoy no such renewal. A man dies and is laid low. Man breathes his last, and where is he? Once life departs, the body returns to dust without hope of natural restoration. As water evaporates from the sea and a river becomes parched and dries up, so people lie down and do not rise again. This observation isn't merely philosophical. It forms the core of Job's complaint. If human life is so brief and filled with hardship, why does God scrutinize it so closely? "You observe me and test me every moment," he sighs, wondering why the Almighty would focus divine attention on examining such temporary beings. Job then imagines death as a kind of refuge. "Oh, that you would hide me in the grave, that you would conceal me until your wrath is past." Perhaps after death, God might remember him with favor. "If a man dies, shall he live again?" Job asks, his question hanging in the still desert air. Despite everything, a flicker of hope remains. "All the days of my hard service I will wait, till my change comes," Job promises. Even in the depths of despair, he imagines a future summons from God that he would eagerly answer, yet the present reality crashes back. "But now you number my steps, watching for my sin." Job feels trapped under divine surveillance, his every move scrutinized for fault. "My transgression is sealed up in a bag," he laments, using the image of evidence preserved for judgment. As night falls across the land of Uz, Job concludes his meditation with images of erosion and decay. Water wears away stones, floods wash away soil. Similarly, God destroys human hope through relentless pressure. You prevail forever against him, and he passes. You change his countenance and send him away. The final picture is one of isolation. In death, a person knows nothing of their children's achievements or failures. Their only awareness is of their own pain and grief. As darkness envelops the ash heap, Job falls silent, his meditation on mortality hanging heavy in the night air. Morning breaks over the ash heap, bringing new light, but no relief. The three friends have listened to Job's defenses and found them wanting. Now they begin a second round of speeches, their tone harsher, their accusations more direct. Eliphaz speaks first, his previous gentleness giving way to open rebuke. Should a wise man answer with windy knowledge? He asks, dismissing Job's defenses as empty words. You are doing away with the fear of God and hindering meditation before God. The elder friend now directly accuses Job of specific sins. You have taken pledges from your brothers for no reason and stripped the naked of their clothing. These charges come not from evidence but necessity. In Eliphaz's worldview, Job's suffering proves his guilt. Is not your wickedness great? Eliphaz demands. Are not your sins endless? He paints a picture of Job secretly harming widows and orphans while maintaining a public facade of righteousness. Therefore, snares are all around you, and sudden fear troubles you. Yet, even in this harsher speech, Eliphaz offers hope. Agree with God and be at peace, he urges. Receive instruction from his mouth. Confession would open the path to restoration. Gold like dust, silver piled high. Job could again lift his face to God and be heard. When Bildad takes his turn, his speech is shorter, his patience clearly wearing thin. How long will you hunt for words, he sighs, weary of Job's defenses. For Bildad, the matter remains simple. The wicked suffer. Job suffers. Therefore, Job must be wicked. He paints vivid pictures of the fate awaiting evildoers. The light of the wicked is put out, he declares. The flame of his fire does not shine. Traps wait for such people at every turn, snares, nets, and pitfalls. Calamity is hungry for him, Bildad warns, his eyes fixed on Job's ravaged body. The final image is devastating. Future generations will be appalled at the wicked man's fate, just as those in the present shudder at it. Surely such are the dwellings of the unrighteous, Bildad concludes. Such is the place of him who knows not God. Zophar's second speech burns with impatience. My thoughts urge me to answer, he begins, unable to contain himself. I hear censure that insults me. Job's continued defense of his innocence strikes Zophar as a personal affront. Like his companions, Zophar sees the fate of the wicked as evidence against Job. The exulting of the wicked is short, he insists. The joy of the godless lasts but a moment. Though evil might taste sweet in the mouth, it turns to poison in the stomach. The riches the wicked swallow, they must vomit up again. He will not look at the rivers, the flowing streams of honey and cream, Zophar declares, describing how all pleasures turn bitter for those who defy God. Their houses become desolate, their treasures lost to others. As darkness falls on the second day of debate, a shift has occurred. What began as comfort has become confrontation. The friends no longer seek to explain Job's suffering. They use it as evidence against him. Their theology remains intact, but their friendship fractures under its weight. The moon rises over the land of Uz, casting silver light across the ash heap where Job sits. His friends' accusations have grown sharper, their comfort turned to condemnation. Now Job gathers his strength for a formal defense of his integrity. Listen carefully to my words, he begins, his voice steady despite his pain. Let this be the comfort you give me. Job no longer expects genuine understanding from his friends, but he demands a fair hearing. Bear with me, and I will speak. Then after I have spoken, mock on. Job clarifies that his complaint isn't directed primarily at his friends. Is my complaint against man? He asks rhetorically. His dispute is with God himself. Why divine justice seems absent in his case? Why should I not be impatient? He challenges, pointing to the horror of his situation. Then comes the bold claim that will define Job's stance throughout the remaining debate. Till I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. I hold fast my righteousness and will not let it go. Despite everything, the loss, the pain, the rejection, Job refuses to confess to sins he hasn't committed. This isn't mere stubbornness. For Job, integrity is all he has left. His wealth is gone, his children dead, his health destroyed, his reputation ruined. To abandon truth now would be to lose his final possession, his honest standing before God. My heart does not reproach me for any of my days, he insists. This isn't a claim of sinless perfection, but of fundamental righteousness. Job has lived by God's commands, shown kindness to the poor, dealt honestly in business, and walked humbly before his Creator. Job then contrasts his fate with that of the truly wicked. What is the hope of the godless when God cuts him off, when God takes away his life? Unlike his own suffering, which came without warning while he walked in righteousness, the wicked face judgment as the natural consequence of their actions. The wounded man questions whether his accusers truly know God's ways. Will he take delight in the Almighty? Will he call upon God at all times? Job asks, suggesting that his friend's glib theology lacks depth. Their God fits neatly into human expectations of justice. Job's God transcends such limitations. In a moment of clarity, Job offers to teach his friends about God's power. I will teach you concerning the hand of God. What is with the Almighty I will not conceal. Despite his suffering, Job maintains that God's wisdom remains beyond human understanding. This leads to Job's central question: if the wicked often prosper while the righteous suffer, what becomes of simple theories of divine justice? Why do the wicked live, reach old age, and grow mighty in power? He asks. They see their children established, their homes secure, their flocks increasing, all while rejecting God. As dawn approaches, Job concludes his defense with a devastating observation. One dies in his full vigor, being wholly at ease and secure. Another dies in bitterness of soul, never having tasted of prosperity. Where is the justice in such random distribution of fortune? So how can you comfort me with empty nothings? Job asks his friend. Your answers remain falsehood. Their neat theological boxes cannot contain the messy reality of human suffering or divine mystery. Job's defense reveals his deepest struggle, not with the pain itself, but with its seeming meaninglessness. Pain with purpose can be endured, even embraced, but suffering without cause tears at the fabric of faith itself. In the growing light of dawn, Job falls silent. His first formal defense complete, he waits for response. The lines are clearly drawn now. His friends defend a system where righteousness guarantees blessing. Job defends his integrity in the face of evidence that would seem to condemn him. What remains unspoken is Job's most radical act, his refusal to abandon either his faith in God or his conviction of innocence. Where others might reject God in the face of such suffering or falsely confess sins to explain it, Job holds both truths in painful tension. The sun climbs higher, casting shorter shadows across the ash heap. Another day of debate begins. But something has shifted in the air, a sense that human wisdom has reached its limits in the face of divine mystery. The talks between Job and his friends grew harsher. What began as comfort turned to blame. Their words no longer sought to heal, but to accuse. The friends, once quick to sit with Job in silence, now hurled words like stones. Eliphaz spoke first in this final round, no longer gentle in his approach. Is not your guilt great? There is no end to your sins. His words cut deeper than before. He listed imagined wrongs, neglect of the hungry, mistreatment of widows, sending away the empty-handed. These were not small claims, but devastating attacks on Job's character. The once wealthy man, still covered in painful sores, listened as his friend painted him as a monster. How strange that the man who once gave generously was now accused of greed. How bitter that the one known for justice was now called unjust. Job's reply came from a heart worn thin by pain and isolation. Even today my complaint is bitter. His hand is heavy despite my groaning. Yet within this pain, a spark of hope lived on. I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last he will stand upon the earth. This glimpse of faith shone briefly in the darkness of Job's despair. Bildad's final speech came next, strangely brief compared to earlier talks. Perhaps he sensed the failing of their argument or had simply run out of new ways to blame Job. He spoke of God's power and majesty, but added little to the debate. Job's response revealed his growing frustration. How you have helped him who has no power, how you have saved the arm that has no strength. His words dripped with sarcasm. These friends who came to comfort had only added to his burden. The third friend, Zophar, fell silent. The pattern broke. Where we might expect his final speech, we find nothing. Perhaps he realized the futility of more words. Or maybe, seeing Job's unbroken faith despite such suffering, he had no more arguments to offer. The air hung heavy with unspoken thoughts and failed comfort. The simple answers these friends brought, that good people prosper and bad people suffer, lay shattered on the ground. Job had proved their neat theology couldn't explain his messy reality. And so the third cycle of talks ended, not with resolution, but with deeper questions. The friends who came to explain away Job's pain succeeded only in adding to it. Their words, meant to defend God, somehow missed his heart entirely. Job stood alone now, abandoned by friends, yet unwilling to abandon his belief in his own innocence. He gathered his strength for one last powerful defense. This was not just a reply to his friends, but a public testimony of his integrity. "As God lives, who has taken away my right," Job began, "I will not speak falsehood, nor will my lips utter deceit." Though God seemed distant, Job swore by his very life to speak only truth. Even in his darkest hour, he refused to seek escape through lies. He looked back at his former life with aching heart. "Oh, that I were as in the months of old, when God watched over me." Job remembered when God's friendship felt close, when his path seemed blessed, when his children gathered around his table. Those sweet memories now made his present pain even sharper. Job described his former place in society. He rescued the poor, helped orphans, guided the blind, carried the lame. When he spoke, people listened. They waited for his words like spring rain. His counsel brought hope to troubled hearts. "I put on righteousness and it clothed me," he said. "My justice was like a robe and a turban." Job had lived as a man of integrity, not just in public view, but in the quiet places where only God could see. He had made a covenant with his eyes not to look lustfully at young women. He had been fair with his workers, generous with the needy. With growing boldness, Job issued a formal challenge. "Let the Almighty answer me." He longed to present his case directly to God, confident in his innocence. Job declared that if he had stolen land, mistreated servants, ignored the poor, trusted in wealth, or worshipped the sun and moon, then let him face punishment. "If my land has cried out against me," he said, "let thistles grow instead of wheat." Job was so certain of his integrity that he was willing to call curses upon himself if he had done wrong. This was no small claim in a world where such oaths were taken with deadly seriousness. Job ended with a solemn declaration: "Here is my mark. Let the Almighty answer me." Like signing a legal document, Job put his name to his defense. He had nothing to hide, nothing to fear from divine examination. His words hung in the air like a challenge to heaven itself. The man on the ash heap had spoken. The ball was now in God's court. Would there be an answer from beyond the clouds? Would God break his silence to respond to this bold claim of innocence? The friends sat stunned. Job waited. The universe held its breath. When the dust settled from Job's powerful defense, an unexpected voice broke the silence. Young Elihu, who had been listening quietly all along, could contain himself no longer. His anger burned at Job for justifying himself rather than God, and at the three friends for failing to answer Job properly. "I am young in years, and you are aged," Elihu began, explaining why he had kept quiet until now. He had respected age and experience, hoping wisdom would flow from gray hair. But having heard the debate play out, he was deeply disappointed. "It is not the old who are wise, nor the aged who understand what is right," he declared boldly. Elihu claimed the Spirit of God had given him insight that both Job and his friends had missed. His young eyes saw what their older ones could not. Unlike the three friends who simply accused Job of secret sins, Elihu offered a different view of suffering. Perhaps pain wasn't always punishment. Perhaps God used trials to teach, to protect, to guide people back to himself. Elihu spoke with the passion of youth, convinced he alone understood the true answer to the mystery of Job's suffering. He positioned himself as a mediator, not fully siding with the friends, yet not accepting Job's claims of innocence either. "Far be it from God that he should do wickedness," Elihu insisted. "God doesn't act unjustly or play favorites. He treats rich and poor alike. His eyes watch every step we take. There is no darkness where evildoers can hide from him." The young man's words poured out like a flood. Where the other speakers had taken turns in orderly debate, Elihu seemed unable to stop once he began. 4 lengthy speeches flowed from his lips without pause for response. He claimed to speak on God's behalf, Yet, something important set him apart from the friends. Elihu suggested that suffering might serve a purpose beyond punishment. It might be God's megaphone to get our attention when we drift from the path. God delivers the afflicted by their affliction, he declared, and opens their ear by adversity. In this view, Job's pain might be a classroom, not a courtroom. God might be teaching, not punishing. As Elihu finished his eager speech, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. The air grew thick with anticipation. Something was coming, something that would forever change how Job understood his suffering. Elihu's youthful passion spilled into his first major speech. "I am full of words," he admitted. "The spirit within me constrains me." Like new wine in old wineskins, the pressure of his thoughts threatened to burst forth. He simply had to speak. Unlike the older friends, Elihu promised to treat Job as an equal. "Behold, I am toward God as you are. I too was pinched off from a piece of clay." This humility set a different tone. Elihu saw himself not as Job's judge, but as a fellow human made by the same divine hand. He focused on Job's claim that God had been silent. "Why do you contend against him, saying, 'He will answer none of my words'?" Elihu suggested that perhaps God had been speaking all along, but Job hadn't recognized his voice. God speaks in one way and in two, though people do not perceive it. According to Elihu, God might speak through dreams and visions in the night. He might speak through pain and illness. He might even speak through messengers who help us understand what is right. This was a fresh perspective. While the three friends saw suffering only as punishment, Elihu suggested it might be a gift, God's way of keeping us from paths that lead to greater harm. He keeps back his soul from the pit, his life from perishing by the sword. Elihu painted a picture of God as a loving teacher, not a distant judge. In this view, Job's suffering wasn't meant to crush him, but to save him from hidden dangers. Pain wasn't the end, but the means to a greater purpose. For the first time in the debate, someone suggested that suffering might have meaning beyond simple cause and effect. It might be preventative, protective, or instructive. It might come from love rather than anger. "If there be for him an angel, a mediator," Elihu continued, "one of the 1,000, to declare to man what is right for him, then man prays to God, and he accepts him." Here Elihu hinted at something profound, the need for a go-between to bridge the gap between humans and God. Little did he know how prophetic these words would prove. Centuries later, another mediator would enter the story of human suffering, one who would not just speak about pain, but experience it fully himself. Elihu concluded his first speech with an invitation. "If you have words, answer me. Speak, for I desire to justify you. If not, listen to me. Be silent, and I will teach you wisdom." But before Job could respond, Elihu launched into a second speech. Without pausing for Job's reply, Elihu continued making his case. "Hear my words, you wise men, and give ear to me, you who know." His confidence grew with each sentence. The young man who had waited quietly now couldn't stop talking. For Job has said, "I am innocent, and God has taken away my right." Elihu zeroed in on what troubled him most, Job's claim that God had been unfair. To Elihu, this bordered on blasphemy. How could a mere man question the justice of the Almighty? "Far be it from God that he should do wickedness," Elihu insisted, "and from the Almighty that he should do wrong." He painted a picture of God's perfect justice, a ruler who shows no favoritism, who sees every hidden deed, who rules with perfect knowledge. Unlike the friends who simply assumed Job must have sinned, Elihu focused on the bigger question: can humans ever truly understand God's ways? "Behold, God is great, and we know him not. The number of his years is unsearchable." Elihu described God's power over nature and nations. He raises up kings and brings them down. He notices every step of every person. There is nowhere to hide from his gaze, no darkness deep enough to cover wrongdoing. This wasn't just about Job anymore. Elihu was wrestling with the very nature of the relationship between humans and their creator. Can the clay demand answers from the potter? Can we insist that God explain himself to us? When he is quiet, who can condemn? When he hides his face, who can behold him? Some questions have no easy answers. Some mysteries remain beyond human understanding. As Elihu's words flowed on, the sky began to darken. Clouds gathered on the horizon. The air grew heavy with the promise of rain. Something was shifting in the physical world that matched the spiritual tension of the moment. "Hear this, O Job. Elihu urged as he sensed the changing weather. "Stand still and consider the wondrous works of God." Perhaps the approaching storm would say what words could not, that God's ways are higher than our ways, his thoughts beyond our thoughts. The young man's voice competed with the rising wind. His final words pointed to the awesome power of God revealed in nature, the thunder, the lightning, the rain that falls on fields. Little did he know that the storm he described was about to become the backdrop for God's own arrival. The air crackled with energy. Clouds blackened the sky. What began as a distant rumble grew into a deafening roar. The whirlwind came, spinning dust into spirals that reached toward heaven. And from within this storm, the unthinkable happened. God spoke. "Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge?" The divine voice cut through the howling wind. After chapters of human debate, heaven itself entered the conversation. But God's opening words were not what anyone expected. There was no direct answer to Job's questions, no explanation for his suffering, no comment on his innocence or guilt. Instead, God responded with his own questions, dozens of them, each revealing the vast gap between human understanding and divine wisdom. "Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth?" God asked. "Who determined its measurements? Who stretched the line upon it?" These weren't questions meant to be answered, but to be considered. Each one highlighted Job's absence from the work of creation. God's speech took Job on a cosmic tour. From the boundaries of the sea to the storehouses of snow, from the constellations of stars to the mountain goats giving birth, God's questions spanned the breadth of creation. "Do you know when the mountain goats give birth? Do you watch when the doe bears her fawn?" The questions continued, relentless yet beautiful. "Is it by your understanding that the hawk soars and spreads his wings toward the south? Is it at your command that the eagle mounts up and makes his nest on high?" This wasn't cruel mockery, but a gentle reminder of perspective. Job had demanded that God explain himself, that the Creator justify his actions to the created. Now God was helping Job see the limits of human wisdom. The God who spoke from the whirlwind wasn't the distant cold deity the friends had described. He was intimately involved with every aspect of creation, from the birth of mountain goats to the feeding of young ravens. He noticed, he cared, he sustained all life. Yet this same God was beyond human understanding, the one who laid the foundations of the earth, who set the boundaries of the sea, who knows the paths of light and darkness. This God could not be put in the dock and questioned like a common criminal. Job had longed for God to speak, to answer his charges. Now God had come, not with the answers Job sought, but with questions that would lead him to a deeper understanding than any answer could provide. God's voice continued from the storm, now drawing Job's attention to two mighty creatures, Behemoth and Leviathan. These weren't just animals, but symbols of chaotic power that only the Creator could control. "Look at Behemoth, which I made along with you," God began. The description that followed painted a picture of raw strength. Powerful legs, bones like bronze rods, tail like a cedar tree. This beast could stand unmoved in rushing rivers, fearless and strong. Some scholars think Behemoth may have been a hippopotamus, others an elephant, or even a now extinct dinosaur. Whatever it was, God pointed to this creature as an example of his creative power. He is the first of God's works, a masterpiece of divine craft. Then came Leviathan, even more fearsome than Behemoth. "Can you draw out Leviathan with a fishhook?" God asked. The implicit answer was clear. No human could hope to capture or control this monster of the deep. God described Leviathan's terrifying features: rows of shields for skin, teeth ringed with terror, eyes like the dawn. His sneezings flash forth light, out of his mouth go flaming torches. This picture of a fire-breathing sea monster may seem like mythology to modern ears, but it served an important purpose in God's speech. "Who can open the doors of his face?" God asked. "Around his teeth is terror." The message was clear. If Job couldn't even stand against one of God's creatures, how could he hope to challenge the Creator himself? "On earth there is not his like, a creature without fear," God declared of Leviathan. "He sees everything that is high. He is king over all the sons of pride." This final line carried special weight. Job's complaint had centered on his own pride, his certainty that he deserved better, that God owed him an explanation. Through these two mighty beasts, God reminded Job of a simple truth. Some things in creation are beyond human control or understanding. If Behemoth and Leviathan, mere creatures, remained mysteries that inspired awe and fear, how much more the God who made them? This wasn't about making Job feel small or insignificant. It was about resetting his perspective. The God who crafted these mighty beasts was not obligated to explain his ways to humans. Yet this same God had chosen to speak to Job, not with cold distance, but with questions that invited deeper trust. As the description of Leviathan ended, God's speech drew to a close. The ball was now in Job's court. How would he respond to this divine revelation? The wind settled, the clouds parted. In the sudden quiet after God's voice, Job found himself speechless. What could a man say after hearing the voice of God? What words could possibly follow the Creator's speech? Job had demanded an audience with the Almighty, convinced he would state his case boldly. Now, face to face with God's overwhelming majesty, his planned arguments fell away like autumn leaves. "I know that you can do all things," Job began, "and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted." Gone was the bitter complaint, the demand for justice. In its place came humble recognition of God's unlimited power and perfect wisdom. "Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge?" Job quoted God's opening question, accepting the gentle rebuke. "Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know." This wasn't mindless surrender, but profound insight. Job realized that demanding God explain suffering was like asking the ocean to fit in a cup. Some mysteries remain beyond human grasp, not because God withholds answers, but because our minds are too small to contain them. "I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear," Job continued, "but now my eye sees you." This was the turning point, the difference between knowing about God and truly knowing Him. Job had moved from second-hand religion to first-hand encounter. What followed was one of the most touching moments in Scripture. "Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes." The word repent here doesn't suggest Job was admitting to hidden sins. Rather, he was changing his mind about the nature of his complaint. Job didn't repent of imaginary wrongs, but of demanding that God explain himself. He repented of assuming that divine justice must follow human logic. He repented of thinking he could stand as God's equal in matters of cosmic justice. This was no defeat, but a victory of understanding. Job had not received answers about why he suffered, but he had received something far better. He had experienced God himself. The mystery of suffering remained, but it was now held within the greater mystery of God's presence. Job's transformation came not through explanations, but through encounter. In meeting God, he found that his questions, while not directly answered, somehow no longer mattered in the same way. The answerer had proven greater than any answer he might have given. With Job's humble response still hanging in the air, God turned his attention to the three friends. These men, who had spoken so confidently about divine justice, now faced divine judgment themselves. "My anger burns against you and against your two friends," God said to Eliphaz, "for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has." What stunning words! The very man they had judged was now declared right by God himself. The friends had painted God as a simple vending machine of justice: put in good deeds, get out blessings, commit sins, receive punishment. Their theology was neat, tidy, and completely wrong. They had reduced the living God to a predictable formula. Job, for all his bitter complaints and questions, had wrestled honestly with God. He had spoken from his heart, refusing easy answers or false confessions. In God's eyes, this raw authenticity was what is right compared to the friends' pious platitudes. Now came God's surprising command: "Take 7 bulls and 7 rams and go to my servant Job and offer up a burnt offering for yourselves." The friends who had come to correct Job were told to seek his prayers on their behalf. "My servant Job shall pray for you, for I will accept his prayer, not to deal with you according to your folly." The tables had completely turned. The accused became the intercessor. The sinner became the priest. This moment revealed God's heart in ways the friends had never understood. The God they thought demanded perfection actually valued honesty. The God they presented as distant and mechanistic actually desired relationship more than ritual correctness. Imagine the scene as the friends approached Job with their sacrificial animals. The men who had accused him of secret sins now had to ask for his prayers. The one they had abandoned in his hour of need now had to speak to God on their behalf. And the Lord accepted Job's prayer. With these simple words, healing began, not just for Job, but for the broken relationships around him. Through forgiveness and intercession, the community, torn apart by suffering and judgment, began to mend. In this beautiful turn of events, we see that God cares not just about correct theology, but about restored relationships. The friends who failed to comfort Job were not cast aside, but given a path to restoration, through humility, sacrifice, and the prayers of the very man they had wounded. The final scene of Job's story reads like the ending of a fairy tale. And the Lord restored the fortunes of Job when he had prayed for his friends. The timing here matters. Job's healing came after he prayed for those who had hurt him. Forgiveness preceded restoration. The blessings poured down in abundance. And the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. The doubled wealth symbolized God's generous restoration. 7,000 sheep became 14,000. 3,000 camels became 6,000. 500 yoke of oxen became 1,000. Family and friends who had kept their distance during his suffering now returned, breaking bread in his house and comforting him. They brought gifts of money and gold rings, adding to his renewed prosperity. Most precious of all, Job was blessed with a new family. He had also 7 sons and 3 daughters. The exact number, as before, 7 sons and 3 daughters, suggesting complete restoration of what was lost. His daughters received special mention. In all the land there were no women so beautiful as Job's daughters. Even more remarkable for ancient times, their father gave them an inheritance among their brothers. This unusual gesture showed Job's character, generous, loving, unbound by the limiting customs of his day. Job lived to see 4 generations of descendants, and Job died, an old man and full of days. After all his suffering, he enjoyed a long life surrounded by children and grandchildren. The man who had cursed the day of his birth now departed peacefully, satisfied with his years. The story ends here, a tidy conclusion to an untidy experience. Yet questions linger. Did the new children truly replace those who died? Could wealth, however doubled, compensate for months of physical agony? The text offers no simple answers. Perhaps that's the point. The book of Job never promises that suffering will make sense or that losses will always be restored. It doesn't give the formula for avoiding pain or guaranteeing prosperity. Instead, it offers something more profound, the assurance that God remains present and engaged even in our darkest hours, that questioning God is not forbidden, but can lead to deeper relationship, that sometimes understanding comes not through answers, but through presence. Job's story ends with restoration, but its message isn't that faithful people will always see their fortunes restored in this life. Rather, it's that God himself, not wealth or health or even answers, is our greatest treasure. Job found this treasure not despite his suffering, but through it. And so the curtain falls on one of the Bible's greatest dramas, a man who lost everything except the one thing that mattered most, his relationship with the living God who speaks from whirlwinds and walks with us through fire and storm. Throughout the centuries, Job's story has resonated deeply across different faiths and cultures. Ancient Jewish traditions viewed Job as a model of patience and endurance, with rabbinical commentaries pondering his place in history. Some placed him during the time of Abraham, while others believed he lived during the Exodus from Egypt. The Talmud suggested Job might never have existed at all, but served as a parable to teach divine wisdom. Early Christian thinkers saw Job as a prefiguration of Christ's suffering. Gregory the Great wrote a massive commentary on Job called Moralia in Job, interpreting the text as an allegory for Christian virtues. Augustine found in Job a testimony to human frailty and divine sovereignty. These interpretations shaped medieval Christian understanding, with Job appearing in church art as a symbol of patient suffering. In Islamic tradition, Job Ayyub is honored as a prophet whose steadfastness in the face of trials demonstrated perfect submission to Allah. The Quran mentions him briefly but powerfully, emphasizing his endurance and eventual restoration. Muslim commentaries expanded on his story, often highlighting his constant prayer despite affliction. Eastern Orthodox iconography frequently depicts Job seated on his ash heap, his body covered with sores but his face serene, capturing the paradox of suffering born with dignity. Ethiopian Christianity developed unique traditions around Job, considering him a saint and celebrating his feast day. The Jewish mystical tradition of Kabbalah found deeper meanings in Job's ordeal, suggesting his suffering served cosmic purposes beyond human understanding. Hasidic teachers used his story to illustrate the hidden mercy within apparent cruelty, the divine spark concealed within darkness. During the Middle Ages, mystery plays brought Job's story to illiterate populations throughout Europe. His patient suffering became a cultural touchstone, a model for how to endure the plagues, wars, and hardships that marked medieval life. The patience of Job entered common language as the highest expression of endurance. Folk traditions across cultures adopted and adapted Job's story. In some African American spirituals, Job's trials became a metaphor for the slavery and the hope for divine liberation. Russian peasants told tales of Job that reflected their own struggles with harsh conditions and unyielding authority. What unites these diverse interpretations is their recognition of Job as a universal figure who speaks to the human experience of undeserved suffering. His questions echo across time and space, finding new meaning in each generation's struggles with pain, loss, and the search for meaning. The Book of Job shatters simplistic notions of divine justice. It stands as a theological earthquake within Scripture, challenging the neat formula that goodness leads to blessing while evil brings punishment. Through Job's experience, we confront the uncomfortable reality that the righteous can suffer while the wicked prosper. God's answer from the whirlwind presents a profound theological shift. Rather than explaining suffering, God reveals himself in all his wild, untamed glory. The divine speech catalogs natural wonders and fearsome creatures that exist beyond human control. This response suggests that God operates on a cosmic scale that transcends human frameworks of justice. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? This divine question underscores the gap between human perspective and divine wisdom. Job's story suggests that faith must accommodate mystery rather than demand explanation. True wisdom begins with humility before the unexplainable. The presence of the heavenly accuser, or Satan, introduces complex questions about evil's place in creation. Unlike later biblical portrayals, this figure appears as a member of the divine court, seemingly operating with God's permission. This uncomfortable partnership raises questions about the source of suffering that the text leaves unresolved. Job's transformation comes not through explanation, but through encounter. His final statement, "I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you," suggests that direct experience of God's presence transcends theological formulas. Faith finds its deepest expression in relationship rather than explanation. The restoration of Job's fortunes in the epilogue has troubled many readers. Does this ending undermine the book's challenge to retribution theology? Perhaps it suggests that while suffering isn't always linked to sin, God's goodness ultimately prevails in ways we cannot predict or control. Job's intercession for his friends reveals another theological dimension. Suffering can create capacity for compassion. The man who endured unimaginable loss becomes the priestly figure who bridges divine and human realms, securing forgiveness for those who misjudged him. The divine speeches notably avoid referring to human concerns. God speaks of mountain goats giving birth, lions hunting, and birds nesting. This cosmic perspective suggests that human suffering, while real, exists within a vast web of creation that follows patterns beyond our understanding. Job's questioning of God reflects a profound theological truth. Authentic faith includes space for doubt, anger, and lament. The biblical tradition validates challenging God, wrestling with divine silence, and demanding answers. Job demonstrates that faith can withstand the fiercest storms of questioning. Ultimately, Job's story resists theological closure. It refuses easy answers to suffering's deepest questions. Instead, it invites us into a faith that embraces mystery, finds meaning beyond explanation, and trusts in divine presence even when understanding fails. The ancient figure of Job stands as a surprising forerunner to modern existential thought. Centuries before Kierkegaard or Camus, Job confronted the apparent absurdity of human suffering. Stripped of family, wealth, and health, he faced the void that existentialists would later identify as the human condition. Job's cry from the ash heap echoes through existential philosophy. "Why did I not die at birth?" he laments, questioning the very value of existence. This radical doubt anticipates Camus' central question in The Myth of Sisyphus, whether life is worth living in the face of apparent meaninglessness. Søren Kierkegaard, often called the father of existentialism, saw in Job a kindred spirit. In his work, Repetition, Kierkegaard praised Job for maintaining his integrity while questioning God. This tension between faith and doubt embodies Kierkegaard's concept of the knight of faith who makes the leap despite rational uncertainty. Job's refusal to accept easy answers mirrors the existentialist rejection of predetermined meaning. His friends offer systematic explanations for suffering, divine punishment, hidden sin, character development. Job rejects these closed systems, insisting on his lived experience over abstract principles. The divine speeches from the whirlwind align with existentialist perspectives on transcendence. God provides no logical explanation for Job's suffering, but instead offers encounter with mystery. This aligns with existentialism's focus on direct experience over theoretical knowledge. Jean-Paul Sartre might view Job as confronting the anguish of freedom. Abandoned by God's protection, Job must create meaning from his suffering without divine guidance. His continued assertion of innocence represents an authentic choice in the face of overwhelming pressure to conform. Simone de Beauvoir's existentialist ethics finds expression in Job's concern for justice. Even in his deepest suffering, Job maintains moral awareness, refusing to falsely confess to wrongdoing. His ethical stance transcends self-interest, embodying what Beauvoir would call genuine freedom. Albert Camus might recognize Job as an absurd hero, similar to his Sisyphus. Both figures face situations without apparent meaning, yet maintain dignity through conscious rebellion. Job's refusal to curse God represents not submission, but a defiant integrity in the face of cosmic indifference. Martin Buber, whose dialogical philosophy bridges existentialism and religious thought, found in Job the essence of authentic relationship. Job's demand to address God directly exemplifies Buber's I-thou encounter, a meeting between genuine persons rather than between subject and object. The restoration in Job's epilogue presents a challenge to purely existentialist readings. Unlike Camus' Sisyphus, Job ultimately finds resolution. Perhaps this suggests that while existential questions are valid, they need not lead to nihilism. Meaning might emerge precisely through the honest confrontation with meaninglessness. William Blake's vibrant illustrations and poetic engagement with Job reveal the text's power to inspire creative reinterpretation. Blake's 22 engravings depicted Job's journey from complacent piety through suffering to authentic vision. For Blake, Job's transformation represented the soul's movement from conventional religion to imaginative awakening. Franz Kafka found in Job a kindred spirit for his explorations of alienation and absurdity. Though rarely mentioning Job directly, Kafka's characters face similar inexplicable trials. Joseph K. in The Trial confronts an impenetrable legal system that mirrors Job's experience of divine judgment without explanation. Herman Melville wove Job's influence throughout Moby Dick. Captain Ahab embodies Job's questioning spirit turned to vengeful obsession. In the chapter The Whiteness of the Whale, Melville directly engages with the terrifying aspects of creation described in God's speeches to Job. Robert Frost's poem A Mask of Reason imagines a sequel to Job in which God explains his actions. With characteristic irony, Frost suggests that God tested Job to demonstrate that man can love his maker even when his maker seems to sport with him. The poem highlights Job's enduring appeal as a vehicle for exploring divine-human relations. Archibald MacLeish's verse play J.B. transplanted Job's story to 20th century America. A wealthy banker loses everything in seemingly random disasters. MacLeish's modern job concludes that love, not answers, provides the only meaningful response to suffering. The play won the Pulitzer Prize in 1959, demonstrating Job's continued resonance. Toni Morrison drew on Job's themes in her novel Beloved. Like Job, her characters face overwhelming tragedy that defies easy explanation. Morrison's exploration of memory, trauma, and healing echoes Job's journey through suffering toward a restoration that acknowledges rather than erases the past. Fyodor Dostoevsky engaged deeply with Job's questions in The Brothers Karamazov. Ivan Karamazov's rebellion against divine justice echoes Job's protests. The character Father Zosima specifically mentions Job, suggesting that his story reveals how suffering can lead to joy without which the world cannot exist. Classical music found in Job a powerful subject. Ralph Vaughan Williams composed Job, a Masque for Dancing, transforming the biblical narrative into a ballet that captured both suffering and transcendence through orchestral color and movement. The work's haunting beauty demonstrates how Job's story translates across artistic media. Contemporary authors continue finding inspiration in Job. Muriel Sparks' novel The Only Problem features a scholar obsessed with the Book of Job while facing his own modern trials. Spark explores how ancient wisdom speaks to contemporary alienation and the search for meaning in a fragmented world. Job's influence extends beyond high culture into popular imagination. The phrase, "the patience of Job," appears in countless contexts, often by people unfamiliar with the biblical story. This widespread cultural footprint demonstrates how thoroughly Job has been woven into our collective understanding of suffering and endurance. The psychological journey of Job mirrors what modern therapists recognize as the grief process. His initial silence, followed by bitter lament, bargaining, anger, and eventually acceptance, anticipates Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief. Job shows us that healing isn't linear, but involves cycling through different emotional states. Job's friends demonstrate common psychological pitfalls when confronting others' suffering. Eliphaz appeals to personal experience, Bildad to tradition, and Zophar to dogmatic certainty. Their failures highlight how intellectual explanations often serve to distance us from others' pain rather than provide genuine comfort. The dialogues reveal how trauma disrupts core assumptions about the world. Job's beliefs about divine justice and the moral order collapse under the weight of experience. Modern trauma theory recognizes this shattering of fundamental assumptions as central to psychological distress. Recovery involves building new frameworks that can accommodate painful realities. Job's physical symptoms, scraping boils, weight loss, sleeplessness, demonstrate the mind-body connection in suffering. His psychological distress manifests physically, while his physical pain intensifies psychological torment. This holistic portrayal anticipates contemporary understanding of psychosomatic experiences. God's response from the whirlwind operates as a form of exposure therapy. Rather than sheltering Job from the chaos of creation, God immerses him in it. This paradoxical approach, facing rather than avoiding sources of fear, aligns with effective treatments for anxiety disorders. Job's restoration suggests psychological resilience rather than a simple happy ending. He emerges changed but functional, capable of forming new attachments despite devastating loss. This portrays what psychologists call post-traumatic growth, the capacity to find meaning and even flourish after profound suffering. The community's return to Job after his ordeal highlights the social dimension of healing. Recovery from trauma requires not just internal processing, but social reintegration. Job's renewed relationships demonstrate that resilience depends partly on community support. Job's capacity to pray for his accusers shows remarkable emotional development. By interceding for those who misjudged him, he transcends victimhood and reclaims agency. This transformation exemplifies what psychologists term benefit finding, the ability to discover positive meaning within negative experiences. The whirlwind speeches address Job's need for cosmic context. By expanding his perspective beyond personal suffering to encompass creation's vastness, God offers what logotherapy founder Viktor Frankl called meaning orientation. Finding one's place within a larger framework provides psychological stability amid suffering. Perhaps most significantly, Job shows that questioning can be therapeutic. His persistent challenges to divine justice don't indicate lack of faith, but rather deep engagement. This aligns with research suggesting that spiritual struggles, when worked through rather than suppressed, often lead to more authentic and resilient faith. After Auschwitz, Job's questions assumed urgent new relevance. The systematic murder of 6 million Jews forced a radical rethinking of divine justice, human suffering, and faith itself. Jewish theologians turned to Job as they grappled with a tragedy that defied conventional explanations. Elie Wiesel, Holocaust survivor and Nobel laureate, found in Job a biblical voice that spoke to modern atrocity. In his essay, The Trial of God, Wiesel compared Job's questioning to his own experiences in Nazi concentration camps. But he noted a crucial difference. At Auschwitz, not only was man dying, but God himself was dead. Rabbi Richard Rubinstein argued that the Holocaust required abandoning traditional notions of God as actively involved in history. In his controversial book, After Auschwitz, he suggested that only a God beyond good and evil, similar to the immoral force of nature depicted in Job's whirlwind speeches, could be reconciled with such overwhelming evil. Emil Fackenheim sought a middle path. His concept of tikkun olam, repairing the world, suggested that human response to suffering matters more than theological explanation. Like Job, who ultimately acts as intercessor for his friends, Fackenheim emphasized ethical action over intellectual resolution. Christian theologian Jürgen Moltmann found in Job's story a precursor to Christ's cry from the cross, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" His theology of the cross suggested that God enters into human suffering rather than remaining detached from it. Job's encounter with God anticipates this divine solidarity with human pain. Emmanuel Levinas approached Job philosophically, finding in his story an ethical challenge. For Levinas, Job teaches that true responsibility begins with concern for the suffering other, not with theological systems. This perspective gained poignant relevance after a Holocaust that revealed the failure of abstract ethics. Primo Levi, another Holocaust survivor, never directly addressed Job, but wrestled with similar questions in works like If This Is a Man. Like Job, Levi confronted the collapse of meaning while maintaining moral clarity. His writings reflect Job's tension between devastating honesty about suffering and persistent ethical awareness. Dorothy Sowell's concept of suffering with compassion draws implicitly on Job. Her work, Suffering, suggests that true solidarity with sufferers matters more than explanation. This approach gained urgency after the Holocaust revealed the inadequacy of theoretical responses to mass atrocity. Contemporary Jewish liturgy often incorporates Job's questions into Holocaust remembrance. Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, services frequently include readings from Job alongside survivor testimonies, creating dialogue between ancient and modern suffering. Perhaps most significantly, post-Holocaust interpretations of Job emphasize the importance of bearing witness. Job refused to accept comfortable falsehoods about his suffering. Similarly, Holocaust literature insists on truthful testimony, even when that truth defies conventional theological frameworks. In both cases, honest speech about suffering becomes an ethical and theological act. Music has embraced Job's story with particular power. Johnny Cash's haunting "The Man Comes Around" draws directly from Job's imagery of divine judgment and human frailty. The song's apocalyptic tone captures Job's sense of cosmic drama playing out in human lives. U2's album The Joshua Tree contains several references to Job's suffering. Bono, raised in a religious household, frequently explores themes of faith tested by pain. The song Running to Stand Still echoes Job's sense of futile struggle against forces beyond control. Cinema has found in Job a compelling narrative framework. The Coen brothers' film A Serious Man, 2009, reimagines Job's story in 1960s suburban America. The protagonist, a physics professor seeking meaning in mounting calamities, encounters the same silence that Job confronted. Terrence Malick's The Tree of Life, 2011, begins with a quotation from Job and explores similar themes of innocent suffering and divine mystery. The film's juxtaposition of cosmic imagery with intimate human pain mirrors the structure of God's speeches from the whirlwind. Television has incorporated Job's themes in unexpected places. The character of Matt Jamison in The Leftovers explicitly identifies with Job as he faces seemingly random suffering. The show explores faith under pressure without offering easy resolutions, much like the biblical text. Children's literature has adapted Job's story with surprising frequency. Why, by Nikolai Popov, tells Job's story through the experiences of animals, making its profound questions accessible to young readers. These adaptations typically soften the harshest elements while preserving the core questioning. Stand-up comedy has found in Job a surprising source of material. Comedians like Stephen Colbert, who lost his father and brothers in a plane crash, have noted that humor often emerges from grappling with life's profound unfairness. Job's bitter sarcasm toward his friends anticipates this use of humor as a response to pain. Visual arts continue to find inspiration in Job. The Chinese artist Ai Weiwei's installations about state persecution echo Job's themes of unjust suffering and speaking truth to power. Like Job, Weiwei insists on moral clarity even when facing overwhelming force. Video games have begun exploring Job-like narratives. That Dragon Cancer tells the true story of a family facing their child's terminal illness. The game embraces Job's honest questioning of God while finding meaning beyond explanation. Social media has seen the emergence of modern Job-like figures, individuals who publicly process suffering through platforms like Twitter or TikTok. These digital laments often mix raw honesty with dark humor, creating community around shared pain, much as Job's story has done for millennia. Job endures because he asks the questions we all ask when suffering strikes. Why me? What did I do to deserve this? Where is God when it hurts? These questions transcend time, culture, and religious background. In Job's raw honesty, we find permission to voice our deepest doubts. The poetry of Job captures suffering's visceral reality. When he cries, "My skin grows black and falls from me," we feel physical pain translated into language. So this unflinching portrayal validates our own experiences of suffering, rather than offering platitudes or abstract theology. Job's friends remind us of our own inadequate responses to others' pain. We recognize ourselves in their well-meaning but harmful advice. Their failings teach us humility when approaching suffering we haven't personally experienced. The divine speeches from the whirlwind offer something rarer than answers. They offer presence. God never explains why Job suffered, but appears in overwhelming immediacy. This suggests that companionship in suffering matters more than explanation, a truth that resonates across religious traditions. Job models integrity under pressure. Despite losing everything, he refuses to speak falsely about himself or God. This moral courage in the face of overwhelming loss inspires us to maintain our own integrity when life collapses around us. The restoration in Job's epilogue speaks to our deep longing for justice. While some readers find this ending too neat, it reflects the human hope that suffering will eventually give way to healing. The text maintains tension between honest acknowledgement of pain and hope for restoration. Job's willingness to challenge God demonstrates faith's surprising resilience. Far from indicating weak belief, his questions emerge from deep engagement with divine promises. This suggests that doubt belongs within faith rather than opposed to it. The book's literary complexity mirrors life's ambiguity. With its mixture of prose and poetry, its divine wager and human suffering, its questions and counter-questions, Job refuses simplistic solutions. This multidimensional approach acknowledges life's genuine complexity. Job's courage to question authority speaks to every age that faces institutional power. Whether confronting political oppression, religious dogmatism, or social pressure, readers find in Job a model for speaking truth despite the consequences. Perhaps most fundamentally, Job endures because suffering endures. As long as humans experience pain that defies explanation, Job's voice will resonate. His refusal to accept comfortable falsehoods about suffering makes him our contemporary, speaking across the centuries with undiminished relevance. Authentic faith includes room for doubt. Job's questions don't indicate weak belief, but rather deep engagement with God. His willingness to challenge divine justice emerges from his conviction that God should be consistent with God's own character. This teaches us that questioning can be an act of faith rather than its opposite. Presence matters more than answers. Job's friends fail him not by coming to sit with him, but by opening their mouths to explain his suffering. The text suggests that silent solidarity, simply being with those who suffer, often provides more comfort than theological explanations. Pain deserves honest expression. Job's laments give voice to the full range of human emotion, including anger, despair, and bitter sarcasm. His example liberates us from false piety that suppresses genuine feeling. True healing begins with acknowledging rather than denying our pain. Community matters in times of suffering. Though Job's friends ultimately fail him, their initial impulse to come to him shows the importance of showing up. Job's eventual restoration includes the return of community support. This reminds us that healing happens in relationship rather than isolation. Beware of using theology as a weapon. Job's friends turn beliefs about divine justice into tools for blame and shame. Their example warns against using faith to judge others' suffering. true wisdom approaches pain with humility rather than certainty. Suffering doesn't always have clear meaning. The text resists simple explanations for Job's ordeal. While his suffering serves purposes in the heavenly court, Job himself never learns these reasons. This teaches us to be cautious about assigning meaning to others' pain. Integrity matters more than comfort. Job refuses to falsely confess to wrongdoing, even when doing so might ease his suffering. His example challenges us to maintain truthfulness, even when lies would provide temporary relief. Perspective transforms suffering. God's speeches from the whirlwind offer Job a cosmic viewpoint that contextualizes his pain within creation's vastness. While this doesn't explain his suffering, it helps him locate it within a larger framework. We too can find resilience by seeing our struggles within broader contexts. Transformation comes through encounter. Job's healing begins not with explanation, but with direct experience of divine presence. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. This suggests that experiential knowledge often proves more powerful than theoretical understanding. Hope remains possible even after devastating loss. Job's restoration doesn't erase his suffering, but offers new possibilities beyond it. His story teaches neither naive optimism nor bitter resignation, but realistic hope that acknowledges pain while remaining open to future joy. The ash heap where we first met Job now appears in a different light. What seemed like a place of utter desolation has become sacred ground. Here, a man dared to question the foundations of heaven. Here, the creator of the universe responded not with lightning, but with poetry. Here, human suffering and divine mystery engaged in conversation. Job sits among the ashes, but his eyes now lift toward the stars. His body bears the scars of suffering, but his face reflects the peace of one who has been heard. The questions that tore from his throat haven't disappeared, but they've been transformed through encounter with mystery too vast for easy answers. Around him gather new children, different from those he lost. Their presence represents not replacement, but renewal. They cannot erase his grief, but they offer living testimony that joy remains possible even after unimaginable loss. They remind us that life continues, bearing both memory and hope. Job's friends have departed, chastened by divine rebuke, yet forgiven through Job's intercession. Their absence suggests that some relationships cannot survive the crucible of suffering. Yet Job's willingness to pray for them demonstrates how pain can deepen compassion rather than harden into bitterness. The heavenly courtroom where Job's story began now seems remote. The wager between God and the accuser has been settled not through argument, but through the lived integrity of a suffering man. Job's faithfulness emerged not from blind obedience, but from honest wrestling with divine silence. Look closely at Job's eyes. They hold a wisdom that comes only through suffering. He is seen behind the curtain of conventional piety to a faith that includes both protest and surrender. He has learned that challenge and devotion can coexist within the same heart. The wind still blows across the ash heap, but now it carries echoes of the divine voice that spoke from the whirlwind. That voice offered no explanation for Job's suffering, but instead invited him into direct encounter with the wild, untamed nature of creation and its creator. Job's scars remain visible, reminding us that healing doesn't erase history. His restoration doesn't validate his friend's simplistic theology, but rather confirms the possibility of new life beyond devastation. The epilogue offers not neat closure, but open-ended possibility. The questions Job asked continue to echo through human history. Why do the righteous suffer? Where is God in pain? What meaning can be found in seemingly random tragedy? These questions find no final answers in Job's story, but they find something perhaps more valuable: divine attention. As darkness falls, Job remains seated on the ash heap that has become his altar. Stars appear overhead, and the same stars God mentioned in the divine speeches. Job gazes up at them, his face reflecting both the weight of suffering and the wonder of being alive beneath such a vast and mysterious sky. His questions remain, but now they're held within relationship rather than hurled into void. This perhaps is faith's deepest wisdom, not answers but presence, not explanation but accompaniment on the journey through darkness toward uncertain dawn.